Thank you. Okay, so yeah, we can probably go ahead and get started, and more people might trickle in. This is the quarterly community call focused on those running nodes on the live peer network, intended to be focused just with relevant information for those operating infrastructure to get feedback from them, to discuss relevant topics or upcoming updates or give information that they need to know. Open to all. It's being recorded and streamed. And it'll be uploaded later for later viewing. So for today's agenda, and by the way, let me know if you don't see the presentation that I'm trying to share, but the agenda is to focus a discussion on how we can reduce the cost of running orchestrator nodes in light of high Ethereum gas prices. That can be the kind of the bulk of the important content here. And then we'll share back some reports and demos in terms of all the fee. We'll report on the fees that are being earned by orchestrators throughout the network over the last few weeks. We'll show a Dune Analytics Dashboard with network usage, can talk about how others can use or instrument one of their own if they're interested. And then we've also been doing some quality evaluation on the live peer network orchestrators through various test streams and whatnot. We can share back some initial results from that. I don't think this is a super long agenda, so if anyone else has any topics they want to discuss or questions that they want to ask, we could have plenty of time for that. Otherwise, may end a little early. Cool. So this kind of big topic on people's minds are orchestrator cost reductions, and the motivation here is this is a chart that I think orchestrator J1V shared in the Discord of Ethereum gas prices over the last few weeks. And you can see that the average was 114 GUA, the max was 500 GUA. I noticed just before this call, it shot up from 100 GUA to 250 GUA plus. And as we've seen, when you're calling reward, it leads to very, very expensive transactions on Ethereum. Orchestrators have to call reward on the network once a day in order to facilitate all of the token accounting and distribution across orchestrators, but also to the token holding delegators. And initially when Live Peer Network launched, this call might cost something like $1 to $2 per day worth of ETH, but lately it's ballooned well past $10 a day. And in the past couple of weeks, we've seen a few days where orchestrators have complained that their reward calls are costing them, $90 a day, which hurts. And that's obviously a large cost. Multiple thousands of dollars a month just to do protocol accounting isn't great for the protocol long term, nor for any individual orchestrator. Now, because a lot of live peer token is being generated by these calls, this may not actually be a huge deal for some of the larger operators on the network. They may be, keeping enough live peer token that they're earning through the call or through the reward cut to more than make up for that high cost. However, I don't think that's a good way of looking at whether there's a problem or not, because it's a huge barrier for new entrants to get started with live peer and run a node. It's a huge barrier for orchestrators with smaller amounts of stake that would have to increase their reward cut to an uncompetitive point in order to make enough live peer token. So we really want to address this and reduce these costs, which we can certainly do through long-term scaling efforts, but I think we have a potential plan in place for how to do it via, or at least a proposal that's being considered for how to reduce these costs in the short term as well. The last point I would just mention here is people have asked, why are these reward calls necessary in the first place? Like, if that's all orchestrators are doing, sitting there calling reward, are they really contributing value to the network? No, not alone, right? They should be doing active work to transcode video to make this network highly useful. The reward calls are kind of an accounting side effect that's necessary. But I think it is important to recognize the role of this inflationary token in subsidizing the cost of running infrastructure and in bootstrapping the network and attracting a community to live peer. And if orchestrators weren't kind of bearing the some of the cost through their big opportunity and able to set a reward cut, then it would put a lot more costs on anyone in the community trying to join this network. So it's actually important that that orchestrators continue to play this role in the ongoing token distribution, and they have the incentives to do so through the reward cut as well. Otherwise, a lot of the kind of bootstrapping mechanisms in the network might grind to a halt. So how do we propose addressing this and reducing gas costs? There's a live peer improvement proposal that's live right now. It's LIP 56, and it's called the reward period proposal. And you can view it on GitHub in the LIP repo. The summary of this at a very high level, and I'll kind of open it up for more details and for discussion, is that we could consider not calling reward and distributing tokens every single day. And therefore, orchestrators wouldn't have to submit a transaction every day. Instead, we could set a reward period, and let's say, for example, it's 7 rounds or 7 days instead of 1 day. Every single day, new LPT could get generated when rounds get initialized, but it wouldn't be distributed until orchestrators call reward on a reward round, which would be once every 7th day. And you'd reduce your costs by 7x in the case of the 7-day reward period, which is pretty significant savings if you're talking about a $30, $40, $50 reward call. Doing that 4 times a month instead of 30 times a month might be nice. The potential trade-off or downside here is that if you're running your node and you just don't happen to be active during the reward round, or you happen to miss the reward call on the all-important reward round, you would miss out on 7 days worth of rewards instead of 1 day's worth of rewards, which would be pretty painful for you and your delegators. And the question here for the community is like whether this kind of risk or trade-off is worth it for the cost reductions that you would get via the reward period approach. So that's just a super high level summary. I have a couple of specific questions to throw out to people, but before I do that, maybe I'd ask Yandin and Nico if you want to summarize anything else that I missed that's important for us to reflect on.
I think the main other thing to reflect on is with the introduction of a reward period. So right now we have a inflation rate that is on a per round basis because new tokens are minted every single round. So that inflation rate should be considered on a per round basis. By introducing a reward period, if it is 7 rounds long, presumably we would want to preserve the current per round inflation rate, and it just is the case that those tokens aren't handed out to the orchestrators until that 7th round. So that is something that is definitely being considered for this LIP, which is not changing the per round inflation rate. So wanting to not touch that at all, and then however that currently behaves, if the inflation rate is X per round, that wouldn't change. It's just that the tokens wouldn't be handed out to the orchestrators until that 7th round. So that's something that is highlighted in the proposal, and I think is worthwhile noting for anyone on the call that is interested in the proposal.
Cool, thanks, Shannon. So has anyone who hasn't shared feedback directly on the issue itself already want to share an initial reaction or have any questions about this proposal?
Yeah, this is Victor. I think I've initially shared some feedback. I think this is totally reasonable. Generally, as I've seen it, like some folks can miss a few days of rewards, and it is punitive to happen to miss the 1 day where it's an entire 7 days. But that's a relatively infrequent occurrence for most validators, and I think that the risk is well worth it, I would probably say, on that side. Just because we're all paying the cost every single day for this in the meantime.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for the feedback. Like I know, I run a node and I want to be accountable to any delegators who delegate towards me. And I agree with you. I have that same reaction. I think the risk that I'd be taking can be mitigated just by monitoring and reminders and alerts and whatnot. Whereas the benefits that we get by saving, thousands of dollars a month potentially is pretty meaningful.
Yep.
What about the like day-to-day accounting and reporting for those of you who run nodes on behalf of specific clients or have a tighter relationship with your delegator? Like, would this throw a wrench in things if all of a sudden there weren't daily rewards that were visible and instead it looked more like weekly?
I can't speak on it from like a taxation perspective, and every customer has kind of like their own circumstances. But what I will say is that relative to other protocols, generally people like don't really have like a huge choice in how rewards are distributed, and like whichever way that they're distributed is just like what you ultimately report and do all the other administrative functions on, such as taxes. And so like it changing it will obviously like have to change things for some people about how they report things, but like everything else will be kind of like the same, and the process will be the same. And so I don't foresee this being like a large thing that will impact people's processes in a way that they're not kind of like used to or able to deal with, especially if they're supporting multiple assets.
Good. Yeah, good feedback. And as usual, like I don't think anyone is going to take third-party reporting requirements or taxation requirements into super strong consideration when it comes to what creates a scalable, reliable open video infrastructure for live peer as a top priority. But it's still good to hear whether people have initial reactions that this would make things really complicated for them. It would make their life difficult. But it sounds like so far no one shared that opinion. Nico, do you have any perspective operating, live pool and a public transcode pool, whether this would bring any negative effects to people who have kind of interacted with live pool in that way?
No, not really, because the GPU miners for live pool aren't really receiving inflationary rewards unless they also provide stake to the live pool transcoder.
Okay, good to know. And then, I saw a few other orchestrators on the call. I don't know if Chris have any questions or initial reactions around this. Not to put you on the spot.
I've got a question about each day new LPT gets generated. And my understanding is right now when an orchestrator calls reward, that's when they actually mint the LPT and it gets minted directly into their stake. I'm interested to know what is the process that actually does that each day new LPT gets generated. Does someone have to call that, or is that built up in the protocol like vesting, or how does that work?
Good question. I believe the high-level summary is that on the initialize round call, the new LPT would be generated, and it would just be sitting within the minter contract, which is where it sits already. And then upon the eventual reward call, it would kind of be accounted for and move from the kind of general, hold of the minter contract into the kind of accounting record for the specific orchestrator and their delegators. And then one consequence of this is that any missed reward call would mean that there's like unclaimable LPT sitting in the minter contract that could really never be accessed. And the most straightforward suggestion would be, well, on a subsequent initialized round call, it would just be burned essentially, because that matches the current behavior of the protocol today. If someone misses a reward call, that LPT never really existed. Though that's a scope for a totally different issue and proposal, whether the community would want that LPT to be used for some other purpose, like a development fund, or could be governed by the governance of the protocol or whatnot. Big interesting topic there, but probably outside the scope of like a quick change to enable reduced gas prices.
I guess my comment then, thank you for that answer. The comment is, like, just in general, it's not gonna increase general community participation and eyes on live peer by making it so that people aren't getting visible, tangible rewards against their address so regularly. Like, I'm not saying it's going to make a huge amount of difference to people's like emotional attachment to the project, but like I know some people who are like checking every day to make sure they got their new LPT today, and that it would just create a change for those people. And I guess in some ways it encourages to take a slightly more hands-off approach to live peer. Maybe it doesn't increase the hands-on.
Yeah, I agree. That's a really good point, especially in a more active like role for delegators as work increases in the network, and they could potentially actively move around stake in order to be routing work towards the nodes that are performing well and sharing fees back and whatnot, where there like would be something to do on like a daily cadence. This is a mechanism that might like reduce that momentum and lead them to be more passive, which is probably a negative.
In that type of environment, you would still have, like, if we have the assumption that there are a reasonable amount of fees flowing through different sets of orchestrators, that still occurs at a regular cadence though, right? So there is that to kind of, there is that information to orient around still.
Would the like accounting updates in this protocol allow a delegator to move orchestrators in between these 7-day reward periods and still earn the rewards that they had been entitled to if they had stayed with one the whole time?
You took my question, Doug. Thank you.
I think at the moment that wouldn't be the case, although I'd say that I think the lower level design of this is still very much in flux. I think the high level goal is the same no matter what, introducing a reward period. But I think, yeah, the design required to accomplish it and kind of like the side effects of that design are still a little bit in flux. So that's definitely something that's a good point to bring up, and it'd be interesting to consider whether there would be a reasonable way to facilitate that. I'm not sure yet.
Cool. Okay, so it sounds like like you said, like the lower level design is still in flux. That would probably need to be solidified before this LIP moved through the process to be proposed and implemented. Do you have a sense of the high level timeline and goals when orchestrators may be able to actually like benefit from these transaction reductions on the network?
I can't say about when. It's hard to say like when this will actually be ready for deployment. Although what I can say is that I think would shoot to have a more solidified design in the next week or so, and then from there, if that feels reasonable, can move it through the rest of the process. So yeah, I guess given that, if it becomes ready in a week and it goes through the rest of the process afterwards, that involves a 10-day polling period as well as like a 10-day last call period. The last call period, like the design can be finalized during the last call period. So yeah, earliest would be like 20 to 25 days from now.
Okay. So in the meantime, you know, we have lots of other gas cost reductions in the work for other roles in the network, like broadcasters and delegators. But in the, you know, for orchestrators, it's really the hardest group to address an immediate savings for. So in the meantime, you know, the best recommendations are, you know, raise the reward cut if you need to, in order to be able to cover your costs. You know, try and not call reward automatically, but manually try and time it at a time that looks like lower prices if you're, you know, willing and able to pay attention. You could consider skipping a reward call if you just didn't deem it to be worth it. I don't see why that would be the end of the world, depending on your kind of role and relationship with your delegators. And you know, I think if people are really struggling here, they don't have a way to cover the cost of this, but they're, you know, committed and interested in the network long term and are, you know, running the right infrastructure to reliably transcode video. You know, definitely bring that up in the Discord. I think there's people looking to stake towards nodes that are making positive contributions, and hopefully, you know, additional stake may be able to allow you to, you know, cover your cost through a reward cut. So don't hesitate to kind of share that position with the community if that's what you find yourself in. And then hopefully in, you know, this 3 to 4 week period, we'd be able to see the fees reduced significantly due to this proposed update. Cool. Okay, so I'd like to move on to kind of give some status updates on fees and usage, unless does anyone else have anything they didn't get to bring up on this cost reduction topic?
I just want to say thank you for the effort that's going into this. It's very welcome.
Great. Yeah, I know it's a top issue on all of orchestrators' minds, and the orchestrators have been the ones that are running this network for years now. So we'll do what we can. All right. Cool. So we have a couple things to show and share in terms of network usage and kind of testing the orchestrators that are running for their quality of service. I'll hand this over to Yandin, who may toss some updates over to other team members as well, to take us through network usage updates.
Cool. So I think can split this update into 2 parts. So the first one is around fees, and then the second one is around performance evaluation. So for fees, I think what might be helpful is if I share my screen to take a look at the same dashboards. So we can take a look at some dashboards together. I'll also send out links for this. This is all publicly accessible. One moment. Cool. Can someone just give me a quick audio confirmation that they can see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So first part, fees on the network. So what we're looking at here is Dune Analytics Dashboard. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, Dune Analytics is this pretty handy tool that makes it easy to write SQL queries against on-chain data. So this is on-chain state as well as events emitted from particular contracts. So I believe they've indexed a bunch of live peer related contracts such that you can easily write a SQL query. So as long as you're familiar with SQL, you can write SQL against the tables that they generated. And what I have here is the title of this dashboard is Weekly API Fees Third Party. And for context, what this shows is right now we have, so LivePeer Inc. is running this hosted API product, which under the hood is connected to both it's connected to public network broadcasters and orchestrators, and many of the streams going into the API are being routed to third-party orchestrators, which are orchestrators in the rest of the network. And what this dashboard shows is the cumulative fees on a per-week basis that have flowed to those orchestrators. And under the hood, the data that it's checking is the fees generated by winning ticket redemption. So every time an orchestrator on the network redeems a winning ticket, it's recorded, and I've just written a SQL query that aggregates all of this into a table and is visualized in this bar chart. So what we can see here is for the last couple of weeks, starting in early July, going through the end of August and the beginning of September, on a week-by-week basis, the aggregate fees generated by these orchestrators. So I think the story that this tells is interesting in that we see when the API product first started sending streams into the public network, in the first couple weeks, we saw some fees being generated at a very relatively low volume, so not breaking $100 US. And moving forward in the next couple weeks, we start seeing a little bit of an uptick. And this uptick is because there were increased number of users that were using the API as a gateway into the public network and as a gateway into live peer transcoding. So we start seeing this uptick starting in the week of July 27th, going into the week of August 3rd, and then finally coming into the more recent weeks. This is where we start seeing like the all-time highs in terms of weekly fee generation. So I think the two best weeks that we've seen thus far are the week of August 10th, where we saw cumulative $495 being generated, and then more recently, the week of August 31st, a cumulative $572 US. Now, in the grand scheme of things, obviously these numbers are still quite small. But the intent by showing this dashboard is that this dashboard is useful for keeping track of progress over time. And I think it's nice to see the upward trend lately as the hosted API has received more usage. And I think what that also highlights is this nice relationship between that API product and the public network, where the purpose of the API is to make it easier for people to get started with LivePeer. But under the hood, it's connected to the rest of the public network, which creates this nice relationship where if the API receives increased amount of usage, that also results in an increased amount of fees for the network. So a lot more progress to be made here, but this dashboard should serve as a useful way to keep track of this over time. So that's a brief update on fees on the network originating from the API, the livepeer.com API specifically. Before moving on to the next part, I wanted to just pause here in case anyone wanted to talk about this dashboard or has any questions about fees.
I'd also just add, for those of you who haven't checked out livepeer.com recently, there's a self-serve API with documentation where you or anyone can register for an API key and get started streaming in a few minutes, trying it out, or integrate it with an app, which I know is a heavier lift. But check it out, and it's focused on user-generated content apps with many streams, and the messaging starting to reflect that now. There was a big update pushed to it recently, so it's great to see the growth in these numbers, and certainly look towards orders of magnitude increasing growth is what we're working towards. I think we have a good building block there at livepeer.com to drive it from that.
Cool. Congrats on all the growth, guys.
Thanks, Tim. Cool. The next fee-related item that I'll highlight briefly is another Dune Analytics table, actually. And this table shows winning ticket redemptions on the network. So all winning ticket redemptions from any orchestrator. So I think this is something that we it would nice to eventually incorporate into something like the Explorer, such that there's a nice UI there, and this is easily accessible for any user that wants to get a sense of like recent network activity. But the nice thing with this Dune Analytics table is that it was fairly simple to just aggregate this with a simple SQL query. So what this table shows us is, yeah, the most recent winning ticket redemptions. So these are fee generation events on the network. And what it shows us is that per redemption, we know the Ether face value of the ticket. So this is the total payout from redeeming that ticket. We can also see that face value translated to US dollars in the USD face value column. And in addition to that, it also gives us a sense of the cost for submitting that redemption. So this is especially relevant now with higher gas prices, where the gas cost for redeeming that ticket will remain the same, but the overall Ether transaction cost will obviously be higher because the gas prices on the network are higher. And in order to kind of illustrate the effect of that, I've also created this overhead column, which calculates the percentage of the total face value of that ticket that the transaction cost represents. So for example, in the first row here, we have a winning ticket that was worth almost 0.2 Ether, which corresponded to approximately 68 US dollars. And there was a transaction cost of approximately 0.02 ETH. This was submitted with a gas price of around 110 GWay. And the overhead is listed as roughly 11%. So the transaction cost corresponded to roughly 11% of the cumulative face value of the ticket. So this column just seeks to highlight what that overhead looks like. And obviously, the most important thing here is that as long as the overhead is less than 1.0, that means that it's a profitable ticket redemption transaction. But in addition to that, you want to make sure that the face value can cover what that doesn't capture right now is you're going to be sharing a portion of those fees with your delegators. So it's important for orchestrators to kind of pay attention to how much fees they're sharing with orchestrators to make sure that they are also themselves getting compensated properly given the transaction costs that they're incurring for redeeming these tickets. So this is another table that I think is might be useful for the community. It's certainly been useful for me to just get a sense of like the most recent history of transactions. And a lot of the work that we're doing from a development standpoint will be to minimize that overhead and kind of just reduce the impact of gas prices on the transaction costs that orchestrators have to pay. So if we keep an eye on this table moving forward, hope to see that number going down over time. So yeah, that's another fee-related table that I think is useful to highlight, and I can share a link to this after the call for anyone that's interested. Any comments or questions about this ticket redemption table before moving on to kind of like the last thing to share?
Is there any ability to do bulk ticket redemption? Like, could you write, I don't know whether that's some kind of pool or just to take the gas costs down materially?
So I believe there is batch redemption functionality in the contract right now. At the moment, I don't recall the exact gas savings from using that feature because I haven't looked at it for a while. But that batch redemption functionality isn't used by the client at the moment. So I think this is a good point that you bring up. It could be worthwhile to see what the gas cost benefits of batching together could be, and if they are if they're non-trivial, then the next step would be to figuring out how to integrate the client to support that. So I think that, yeah, that would certainly be something that would be interesting to investigate.
Cool.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to highlight here is that the value of the overhead is related to how high the face value of the ticket is. And in an ideal world, we just increase the face value such that if the gas prices are high, we just increase the face value, and then the overhead ends up being lower. So right now we have a 0.2 ETH face value resulting in a certain overhead. We could reduce that overhead by increasing that face value to like 0.6 ETH or 0.8 ETH. And that would result in less frequent redemption transactions, but the overhead for the redemption transaction that you do have to make would be smaller. The reason that it's not quite so straightforward is due to the way double spend preventions are handled in this system. So kind of basic TLDR is that the maximum face value for a ticket depends on how much funds the broadcaster has locked up. So if the broadcaster has a low amount of funds locked up, face value can't be as high. If the broadcaster has more funds locked up, face value can be higher. So that's kind of another factor at play here. Cool. All right, then I'll move on to the last update that I think would be worthwhile sharing. This is still a bit rough right now because we just started doing a few trials here, but I'll show kind of like the initial data set that we've compiled. And this, I think, might eventually be cleaned up into a more shareable state. But I think for the purposes of this shareback, it will suffice. So what we've been interested in doing lately is getting a better understanding of the performance of the network as a whole. So this consists of understanding the performance of each individual orchestrator in a particular region. So the two initial metrics that we've been interested in understanding are around quality as well as latency. So for quality, what I mean by quality is not necessarily quality of performance, but quality of output. So with video transcoding, depending on what type of device you're using, a GPU, a CPU, a different model of a GPU, the output of your video is going to vary in terms of quality. And when it comes to transcoding a stream for a user, it's important not to have wild quality fluctuations. You want to maintain consistent quality throughout. So what we did was we did a little bit of benchmarking to understand relative to a certain benchmark video that we have, what is the relative quality of a variety of orchestrators on the network. And we use this video industry standard metric called SSIM, which basically tries to approximate similarity in quality between two videos. And what we did was we just sent some test videos to a variety of orchestrators on the network and calculated their scores. So what you see on the screen here is this spreadsheet where we used to accumulate this information. And we don't need to go too into detail about like what each column means, but if you just look at some of the numbers at a high level, you can see that sometimes you see a 0.99, you also see a 0.98, you also see a 0.64. And what these numbers mean is that the closer you are to 1 means 1 basically means you're pretty much exactly the same quality as your benchmark. And the closer that you are to 1 means the closer you are to the benchmark. The farther away you are from 1 means the farther away you are from that benchmark. So what we see here is that there's quite a few orchestrators that have, relatively speaking, similar scores relative to the benchmark. And we also have orchestrators that are much more similar to the benchmark with a score of 0.99. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we also have orchestrators that are farther away with a score of 0.64, which means that their quality is quite a ways off from the benchmark. And then we also have a bunch of orchestrators that didn't respond at all, so can't really calculate a score for that. So I think that is one piece of information that we've been interested in, and what would be actionable from this information is determining, given that you're working with one orchestrator, which orchestrator you can switch to if you need to, because you want to make sure that the outputs are going to be appropriate in the stream, and you don't end up with one video that's really high quality and then one video that's really low quality. So that's one metric that we've been tracking. Before talking about latency, any initial thoughts or comments about this?
What's a specific action an orchestrator could take if they were looking to improve their score or debug why they have a low score?
So this here is a little tricky because it's really dependent on what the benchmark is. So in general, a lot of CPUs actually have higher quality than GPUs, at least older GPUs. Higher overall quality perceived by the user. But we don't care as much about that as, like, given that you're working with a particular orchestrator that, let's say, has a GPU, we want to make sure that if we need to switch to a different orchestrator, that it's an orchestrator of similar quality. So I think so I think it's a little tricky to say like what the actionable steps here are, besides just wanted to make people aware that this is something that impacts how work will be allocated in the future, where if you work with an orchestrator of a particular quality, you're going to want to continue to work with orchestrators with similar quality. And I think roughly speaking, I think roughly speaking, something that might be worthwhile looking into is knowing that the network also prioritizes speed. Using newer models of GPUs is probably the best bet, given that the newer models of the GPUs have higher quality themselves, but they also are quite fast. So that would probably result in like the best trade-off to make, where you can't guarantee that you'll have the same quality as another orchestrator if someone wants to switch to you, but you can at least make sure that you have the highest quality possible yourself and you're transcoding as fast as possible. So that's probably like the best thing that I can think of right now if like you want an actionable step, but this is more informational than it is like an ask for people to do something.
I do see a little bit of a discrepancy there between like the original LivePeer story of making use of existing hardware and having to now kind of, if you have a bad quality, to kind of acquire newer GPUs. So I'm wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so this is where I would loop back to saying that like it's hard to say that like this is something that you should do. I mainly stated that as like if you are starting fresh and you're wondering what to do, then that might make sense to do, to just get a newer model GPU that, because it has a higher quality and it also is faster in terms of transcoding. So what this does not mean is that just because you have like an older model of a GPU that you're not going to get work on the network. I think what this simply is highlighting is that in the future, work will need to be routed to GPUs that transcode similar quality output, or else it's going to result in a poor experience for the user. And that's simply like informational, and that's kind of like the best that I can say about that right now.
And can I just ask, the columns that have zeros, is all of them ones that didn't respond? Or were they some of them not selected because they were too expensive or something? Or did they all not respond?
I believe I believe in the trials done that there was an uncapped price because it was a very short video. So I believe it's the case that they just simply did not respond.
So is there any opportunity to publish a lot of this data? Because it basically suggests that there's more than half the network is effectively unresponsive and dragging down the network and shouldn't be either given work or given delegations, right? Is that a fair assumption?
Yes, I think. Yeah, I think that's a fair assumption, and I do think that this is something that could be definitely shared. This was kind of just like the product of like a couple days work, so can definitely clean it up a little bit into like a more shareable format in order to make this a little clearer.
Right. Seems like a yes, but this is preliminary.
That's cool. Okay.
Cool. And then the next, one second. The next metric that we tried getting a little bit better understanding of is latency. So latency in terms of which captures both kind of the upload and download time from an orchestrator as well as the actual transcode time. So these are rough approximations. So kind of followed a similar process as the quality metric that we were getting more insights into. And the process here was similar, where test videos were sent to each orchestrator and then took the average upload time, average transcode time, and average download time, and for each segment, and then calculated an average round trip time, which we kind of consider as the round trip latency. And the caveat here is that obviously this is going to be dependent on where the test is run from. So we ran this from the middle of the US, so obviously these results would only be particularly relevant if you were planning on streaming from the middle of the US. Eventually, the idea would be to run this test from a variety of locations because the data that we get will be dependent on what location we run it from. But for now, this just shows us kind of the results from running it in the middle of the US. So what you can see here is that what's highlighted in bold are the round trip latencies, the average round trip latency for a segment for each of these orchestrators. So this also varies quite a bit, and this is all still pretty preliminary, but we can see that the second row, for example, just from eyeballing it, has the best performance in terms of latency. And you see across a few trials, we have, this is recorded in milliseconds, by the way. So the first couple trials, we have around 2.1 second round trip, and then we have a 1.3 second round trip, and then a 1.1 second round trip, followed by a 1.3 second round trip. So that just serves as an example. And the idea behind this trial was to just start to develop a better sense of, like, from each region that you could be streaming from, given the list of orchestrators that are accessible, what the expected latency could be. And I think if people are interested in actual next steps based upon some of this data, I think it's a little more clear here, where the things that people can do to kind of minimize this number. Obviously, once again, this depends on what region a stream originates from, but the things that one can do in order to reduce those numbers from a particular region are, once again, like, if you have access to higher end GPU that's more performant, obviously that'll help because transcoding will be much faster on higher end GPUs. And then just generally transcoding on GPUs will be much faster than transcoding on CPUs. But in addition to that, something else that comes into play is geographic coverage. So the more geographically distributed a particular node is, or a particular node operator is, if they're able to run nodes in multiple locations, then that is going to be better, because the more region coverage that they have, it reduces the kind of round trip time that would be required from a stream in that region. So I think those are some of the things that one can think about if they were interested in reducing these numbers in particular regions. And once again, these are just preliminary numbers from the middle of the US. Would want to generate these numbers for other regions that streams might originate from as well.
Yeah, I definitely think having the like per region view here would be, you know, as valuable as just a single share back here. And just to give everyone on the call some insight into like the regions that are seeing a lot of traffic right now. So there's a lot of streams originating out of Chicago. There's streams originating out of London, streams originating out of Frankfurt, streams being originated out of Singapore. If we're undercovered in the Singapore region, and we're actually looking for kind of, you know, early good partners that are looking to kind of like work closely with the team to get their GPUs spun up around Southeast Asia geography. So if you're interested in doing that, I think there's probably an opportunity to like establish a footprint there, generate good numbers on these reports, earn a lot of the initial fees. So, you know, you've seen the fee numbers aren't tremendous yet, but they're growing, and it might be a good opportunity to kind of build up ahead of the curve. So please get in touch if you have capacity there. Also looking for some more redundant capacity in Europe. Yeah, if you're interested in leaning in a little bit, talk to the team. We'd be happy to work with you and help get set up to be performant on these numbers.
Cool. So yeah, that kind of wraps up some of the updates that I wanted to share back regarding fees as well as performance evaluation. So can definitely drop links to the Dune Analytics dashboards pertaining to the fees in Discord after the call. And I think we need to clean up some of the preliminary results from the performance evaluation before sharing some of that with the rest of the community. But that's also something that would probably want to be able to do on a consistent basis. So going to try to figure that out as well, and then share it back.
Thanks, Shannon. The last thing I wanted to share was just a quick announcement that there's a new channel in Discord called Orchestrator-Announcements that some people requested. The idea there is it's a read-only channel where important announcements about software updates, governance votes, these orchestrator-focused community calls, and any like specific feedback requests will be made. And so if people are kind of having Discord fatigue, or they don't check in that often, but they don't want to miss anything important, it'd be a good idea just to set notifications from that channel on, or to send you a push. It won't be spammed. There's no discussion in it, but anything that's important for you to see should come through that channel. Cool. Coming to the top of the hour here. Anything that people wanted to ask about or discuss that we didn't get to? All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. We'll get the recording up online for those who couldn't be here. And yeah, keep up the good work. Stick with it. Fees are rising. We'll get these gas costs reduced and work towards, you know, even better scaling solutions over the medium term. We'll see y'all soon.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.